I now give the floor to the representative of France to introduce the statement of the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, His Excellency Jean-Yves Le Drian. Mr. President, I have the honor of giving the floor to Mr. Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, who will give France's statement to the General Assembly.
Monsieur le Président.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, heads of state and government, heads of delegation. In reminding us of the extent to which our destinies are linked, for better and for worse, the crisis of the pandemic has also reminded us of the value of what, for more than 75 years, has united us within this organization. The instinctive desire to cooperate, the primacy of law over force, the unconditional respect for the human person. The principles of our Charter have lost nothing of their meaning, quite on the contrary. Today's crises and challenges have made them even more essential and given them new relevance. Our security, our health and our planet are now common goods, which is incumbent upon us to work together to preserve together. This imperative is in no way abstract. It is in no way an ideal. It is, in very concrete terms, what is at stake with each and every choice we make, and is in equally concrete terms our punishment each time we are divided, each time we give up, each time we are powerless, because in a world of exchanges and interdependencies, a world in a state of environmental emergency, a world in the grips of the worrying tendency to brutalize, and in a world facing the constant temptation of unilateralism, everything that we do together, or conversely, everything that we fail to do, involves us all. We must be cognizant of this phenomenon and learn its lessons together. Despite the attacks it has weathered in recent years, the foundations of multilateral system have stood sound. However, too many unchecked risks are building up. On behalf of France, it is first and foremost a message of responsibility that I wish to convey to you today. Our first shared responsibility is the maintenance of international peace and security. These are in danger when power games grow more intense, when bloc mentalities reappear, when our regulatory frameworks collapse, when attempts at fait accompli policies increase in number. It is for this reason that France is calling for the convening of a P5 summit to set out a joint action programme to enable the Security Council to fully exercise its mandate and to embark upon a dialogue on the key issues of arms control and our collective security. And it is for this reason that we are taking action and will continue to do so for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, with our willing partners in the region and other Europeans alongside us. France, as an Indo-Pacific nation, has major interests in the region. This is also true for Europe, that has just established a strategy in this field. International peace and security are also directly imperiled every time a new crisis breaks out or crosses a new threshold of severity. In Afghanistan, our duty is to provide the people with the necessary humanitarian assistance, and it is in our common interest to have clear political and security requirements with regard to the regime in Kabul. All ties with terrorist organizations must be severed. 20 years on from the events of September 11th, we know what the rebuilding of a terrorist safe haven would mean for us all. In the Levant and the Sahel, we must, for the same reason, continue to fight the terrorist threat. We must work to restore dialogue where it has broken down, and we must work to give the people new prospects for the future through fighting for stability and development. The President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, recently travelled to Baghdad to support the Iraqis' determined efforts to come together and restore their sovereignty. In the Sahel, we are adapting our military structure so as to be able to act in the long term to meet the expectations of our regional partners and to remain fully available to our international partners, those from the Coalition for the Sahel and those serving within MINUSMA. These efforts, which are producing real results, Indeed, by way of example, I would point to the recent killing of Abu Walid al-Sahoui. These efforts are not sustainable without political stability and without the respect for the democratic process. I'm thinking here particularly of the timetable for the elections in Mali, which must be strictly observed. In Libya, there is now a credible path in place to restore unity and sovereignty in the country, provided that all parties uphold their obligations, provided that foreign mercenaries withdraw, provided that the ceasefire holds, and provided that elections are held as planned on the 24th of December. France hopes that the Security Council, Libya's neighbours, and those that can exert influence on the region can cooperate to achieve our common goal of completing the ongoing transition. This is the aim of the international conference to support the political process and restore sovereignty in Libya, which we will host in Paris on the 12th of November. Whether in the divided Middle East, along the contact line in Ukraine, in Nagorno-Karabakh, or the South Caucasus, where the risk of conflict cannot yet be ruled out, we must prevent tensions, uphold international law, and collectively support the implementation of political solutions which are tangible in form. With regard to the continuing Iranian nuclear program, we must be absolutely unequivocal. Iran cannot be allowed to think any longer that time is on its side, because the more dangerous its nuclear program becomes, the greater the risk of a major crisis. The positions taken by the United States yesterday cannot justify Iran's continued violation of its JCPOA commitments. France will do everything it possibly can to encourage dialogue, but the only possible way forward remains an agreement making it possible to establish that Iran is once again upholding its obligations. It is therefore essential that negotiations resume very quickly indeed. Violations of international humanitarian law constitute a serious threat to international peace and security. This is particularly true when humanitarian and medical personnel are targeted, even when they are providing emergency relief to people. We must therefore equip ourselves with the means to better prevent these crimes and punish their perpetrators, be they in Syria, Yemen, Niger, the Central African Republic, Ethiopia, or anywhere else. Our responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, is also to build pragmatic and inclusive responses to the major global challenges that will determine our shared future. Let us begin with the COVID-19 challenge, which incidentally is not yet behind us. Let us be very clear, the health of some depends on the health of all. We must therefore pursue efforts that, through the ACT-A initiative, have already provided 255 million vaccine doses to 141 countries. We cannot allow the vaccine divide between the North and the South to widen any further, because what is at stake is the very meaning and credibility of multilateralism. We cannot allow the vaccine divide to widen any further, because we know that if immunity is not global, there will be no immunity. There is therefore an urgent need to step up the pace of deliveries of vaccines to ensure that each vaccine is administered properly and to strengthen our production capacities in all continents. France will continue to work closely with its partners, particularly those on the African continent, and we are proud to our commitment to provide 60 million doses will be made good by the end of the year, and we are proud to contribute to the financing of a project ensuring technology transfer to South Africa, which will allow Africa the capacity to provide mRNA vaccines independently. International solidarity must also prevail when it comes to the other challenge of the pandemic crisis, the challenge of economic recovery. The debt service suspension initiative of the G20, followed by the establishment of a common framework that can now be used for its implementation, is one response to the emergency. But we must go further by building a new pact with Africa that President Macron called for at the Summit on the Financing of African Economies in May 2021. G20 must commit to ensuring that the allocation of special drawing rights that we decided upon at the IMF is swiftly supplemented by the reallocation of a portion of these to countries which need them most. France is ready to transfer 20% of its SDR allocation to African economies to strengthen the resilience of societies and to support the transition towards a sustainable development model which is in line with our own goals for climate and the environment. The environmental emergency must be at the heart of each of our future choices. without succumbing to fatalism, of course, because the IPCC experts have stated that if we swiftly lower our emissions, we can still limit warming to 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees. We must take urgent action, but it is not too late. However, when we act, it must be with no half measures because, as the Secretary General has firmly stated, we are now on a path towards disaster due to insufficient commitments that are leading us towards global heating of 2.7 degrees, for which we will all pay a heavy price without exception. COP26 will begin on the 1st of November, will therefore stand as a moment of truth. Each of us must shoulder our responsibility and provide a contribution that is commensurate with what is at stake, namely, human lives, international civility, and the future of generations to come. Before it is too late, we must rally around the goal of climate neutrality by 2050. Here again, France will show its solidarity by providing €6 billion a year and by devoting more than a third of its financing to climate adaptation. The fight for climate must go hand in hand with the fight for biodiversity. In Marseille, during the IUCN World Conservation Conference held in early September, we made robust commitments that we must now implement. I'm thinking particularly of the iconic project of the Great Green Wall for the Sahara and the Sahel. We must also put climate finance to work for biodiversity, given that the connections between the two matters are now well recognized. During this time of global economic recovery, we must ensure that our trade practices are fully compatible with our desire to demonstrate international solidarity and our climate and environment objectives. We must do this by establishing new levers in accordance with WTO law, such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism that we wish to establish in Europe to fight against carbon leakage. This fight echoes the fight that we are waging against imported deforestation and violations of social rights across our value chains. We must do this at the same time by working on a veritable greening of the multilateral trade framework at the WTO ministerial meeting this year, starting with an ambitious agreement for regulating fisheries subsidies. The future of our oceans is at stake. We also have a responsibility to the very principles of multilateralism, of which we are the guardians. We have the responsibility, first of all, to preserve our ability to act in the name of these principles and to promote a truly multilateral order. In this regard, Mr. Secretary General, I wish to commend your action and your efforts to inject new impetus into the United Nations system. We will stand by your side throughout your second term. As we support our collective institutions, including their efforts to reform, we must also continue to develop Project Multilateralism. The multilateralism, that is, of the Alliance for Multilateralism, which I launched alongside my German colleague 2 years ago, which played its role fully from the start of the pandemic. We must work for the multilateralism of the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas, which is conducting outstanding work in Iraq, Syria, Mali and Afghanistan, together with UNESCO. We also have a responsibility to defend these principles where they are wavering. In Afghanistan, for example, where the achievements of the last 20 years cannot be erased, particularly when it comes to the access to education and the rights of women and girls. We must defend these principles everywhere where the universal scope of human rights is being challenged, because the universality of these rights is the first political and legal expression of the unity of humankind. Without which, this organization, our organization would have no foundation. This is a commitment I would like to recall that member states freely made and which they freely agreed to uphold. These principles that unite us are the principles that we are responsible for keeping alive today. By upholding them, including in the digital realm, we have seen increasingly responsible behaviours flourish, and we have not managed, unfortunately, to provide an international normative response to curb this trend and to ensure that the rights and freedoms of all are respected. The introduction of a minimum universal 15% tax for multinational companies will help with to ensure that this goal is achieved. We call on all states to support this vital measure. France and its European partners even intend to adopt legislation on digital markets. We encourage our international partners to follow us down this path, and we invite them to work with us to establish a new public digital order in the wake of the Paris call and the Christchurch call to action, which since 2019 have enabled us to take decisive action and to remove terrorist content from the internet. We have a collective responsibility in maintaining international peace and security. We have a shared responsibility in tackling today's major challenges, and we have a responsibility to individually each uphold the values that unite us. For France, this is what this historic period of turbulence that we're experiencing calls for. We must all rise to the challenge. As our country gets ready to take over the presidency of the European Council in the first half of 2022, you can count on our determination to fully assume our share of this three-pronged responsibility. We will engage in all fights for security, solidarity and equality to rebuild with you our shared world. Thank you.
Je remercie le ministre de l'Europe.
I thank the Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of France for the statement just made.